Hello, this is Hans van der Kwast, Senior Lecturer at IHE Delft Institute for Water Education. In this lecture, I'm going to introduce you to scripting. This lecture is part of the Scripting and Python course at IHE Delft, and all materials can be found at gisopencourseware.org. So scripting languages are very important if you want to automate procedures, if you want to do batch processing, like converting a lot of files at once without doing them individually in a graphical user interface. And scripting is also important for advanced analysis and spatial dynamic modeling, as you will learn in this class. We distinguish between high-level and low-level scripting languages, where high-level scripting languages are much easier to use by scientists because they are very much readable, and the low-level programming languages deal with all kinds of computer knowledge that scientists not necessarily have. Examples of high-level scripting languages are Dodge batch files, for example. The same can be used also in Linux with the shell scripts. Many engineers they use MATLAB and Python, which we will learn later in this course. Perl, PC Raster has its own language, and R. These are all high-level programming languages that are close to the language that scientists use, and the scripts are more or less human readable. So why should I learn scripting? Well, as I already said, automation can really save you time. Scripts also keep things consistent. Once you have it in a script, you can repeat it, so it's important for reproducible research, for example. Other people use the same scripts to come to the same results. It also makes knowledge portable. You can easily share it with others, and if they have the input files, they can run the script and then generate the same output files. You will also find out that it's not as difficult as you think. So a lot of people are afraid of working with the command line or writing code and prefer pushing buttons, but you'll see that it's more flexible and you can learn it. And if you don't learn these skills, then somebody else will learn these skills, because it is very much needed in the labor market that you have these skills, especially if you are in GIS modeling or want to make web applications. Here you see some examples. In the green screen we see a command line batch script to convert a set of files, which with the user interface you would do manually, but here what we do is in just 5 lines of code we reproject and clip a certain data set and write it to a new file. And on the right side we see a Python script that is used to convert Idrisi files to the PC Raster time series format, and takes care also of the naming conventions for the extensions of time series. This would be a lot of work to do manually. So in the first exercise we are going to use the command line. And the command line, I was introduced to that with MS-DOS, the Microsoft Disk Operating System, which was on all the IBM PCs and compatible PCs in the 80s and the early 90s, where we ran our software from floppy disks and the early hard drives. And we didn't have a user interface, and we had to type all our commands, even if we wanted to start games, for example. So when the operating system started moving to graphical user interfaces, the command line became less used, but it always was there, and it still is there as the command prompt, for example, on your Windows machine. And from there you can still use the same commands and some other new ones that were used in those days. So as a kid I already learned how to make scripts, because my friends used to have computers where they could run games, and those games were in BASIC scripts, and that was great fun. So I bought a book and learned how to do scripting with BASIC. And later when I started studying, then there was an elective geoinformatics, and one of the tasks was to program the game Snake, which is a geospatial problem. In fact, you have to prevent that the snake hits the wall or hits itself, so you have to keep track of coordinates. And in that time we didn't have Python yet, or we had it but it was not popular. But we had to make this in BASIC, and we also learned about Visual Basic. We made tools to plot drills and to make profiles. So that was an exciting time to get in touch with programming at a more professional level. So I was expecting a modern class. Why do I need to learn DOS in the 21st century? Well, it's not really back to the future. It has still been around. And it's very important to learn the command line to get a better knowledge of the file system when you want to do programming. You need to learn how to navigate. You need to learn how to use absolute and relative paths, what are advantages and disadvantages. It's very useful to understand what is behind the graphical user interfaces in your software. How were the buttons programmed? Can I program these buttons myself? Does the button do what I expected or not? And to have more control on what happens. And simple scripting is also still used in batch files on your computer, on your modern computer. If I do a search on my modern computer, I find 820 batch files. So the command line has been around, it is still around, and it will be around. So very useful to learn if you want to do programming scripting. So besides learning the command line, we are also going to learn some commands related to GDAL or GUDAL. The pronunciation depends on the person you speak with, but I say GDAL. And GDAL is basically a library to translate between different raster and vector formats, and also between projections, and it can do a lot of other spatial analysis. And it's used in many GIS software, and often you will find it behind the different buttons. And in the exercise we will try a few of these commands to convert between raster and vector formats and do reprojections, etc. This is an example from QGIS where the warp command, which reprojects a raster, is in fact a GDAL warp command. And when you fill in the dialog, it will fill in also the arguments to the GDAL warp, and that is printed on the bottom of the dialog. So you could use the same command also from the command line to perform the same, and also add arguments that are not supported by the dialog, but are supported by GDAL warp. GDAL can also be used within Python as a library, so later we'll talk about Python. And you see here that it's already a bit human readable if you're gonna sit for that. And we first import the GDAL and OGR libraries, and then we open a TIFF file, a raster file, and we do some checking on it if it's possible to open it. The last lines are about polygonizing the raster that we loaded, so there's the GDAL polygonize command that applies here. And so you can integrate GDAL also in Python. But in the exercise we're going to use it from the command line. So the exercises for today are introduction to the command line and introduction to GDAL. And you'll find the tutorials and the course materials on gisopencourseware.org.